Welcome to the Keto Geek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Keto Geek Podcast. Today we have Marty Kendall from OptimizingNutrition.com. He is a kick-ass blogger and he talks about nutrition, food, diabetes, so many different things on his awesome blog. He's also a wonderful engineer, sort of like yours truly, of course. And he's also working on something called the Nutrition or Nutrient Optimiser, in which he focuses on consolidating, making this amazing list of stuff that actually, you know what, Marty? I'm going to let you describe the Nutrient Optimiser. You go for it. Give me a description. I give up.
Hey, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and have a chat today. And the Nutrient Optimiser is my latest little project, taking all the things I've developed on the blog, which can go into the weeds a little bit, as you've mentioned, but really what people want is a simple list of, hey, what should I eat? And that varies depending on different people. People have different needs, whether they be diabetic or athletes or whatever their context is. So the Nutrient Optimiser looks at what you've been eating for the last week or two or however long, takes your diet history currently in Chronometer. I then run it through the system and it'll tell you which nutrients you're not getting enough of. And then based on your goals, whether they be diabetes management, keto, cancer management, athlete, bodybuilder, then says, hey, these are the ideal foods for you to eat to get the nutrients you need and also achieve your goals. So hopefully it's the holy grail of nutrition. And yeah, it's great to be able to be talking to you today to talk about my journey and getting the word out there. So thank you very much.
You are welcome, sir. And that's the thing that initially brought me to you when you sent me the link to your Nutrient Optimiser, and then it cascaded into me looking at your blog where there was so much information that it blew my mind. And I think I've spent 2 to 3 weeks with at least 4 to 5 tabs open on my Google Chrome, just looking and reading all of your material. And a lot of it was very informative, very deep, and some of it flew by my head. So I have a ton of questions for you. And today, guys and gals, the topics are going to be insane. We're going to be breaking some barriers. We're going to be shattering some glass as far as food and nutrition is concerned. So Marty, before we begin, is there something that you want to tell to people or anything you want to explain right away before I'm going to bombard you with a lot of things. So I'm just giving you this silent moment, this calm before the storm.
No, it is the Keto Geek podcast, so it might get a bit geeky, and I think you've got a few challenging questions, so it'll be really, really great to talk through those today.
All right, folks, strap on board. Let's start off with the first sort of icebreaker question. So recently, we had the American Heart Association, those guys pointing out that, coconut oil, well, they didn't really point out that coconut oil was terrible specifically, but the media just took it and blew it out of proportions. And that made me think that it makes a catchy headline. All of these things where you say, sugar is the only thing that's horrible, or coconut oil is the only thing that just destroys humanity. So what's your opinion on all of this that's happening where everyone's pointing fingers at just one specific thing and just creating this wildfire?
Yeah, definitely. We all like to keep things simple and sometimes too simple. And I think Einstein said, make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler. And being an engineer, I'm able to deal with, different options. And my day job is looking at motorway alignments or investment options or whatever, using typically multi-criteria analysis, which takes a number of different factors and brings those in typically quantitatively to say, how can we use all the relevant data to make the best decision? So, when it came to trying to manage my wife's diabetes or, how to optimize my health, it's like, well, maybe there's a quantitative way to optimize food choices for me and my wife and my family. So, similar sort of thing. We try to demonize sugar or saturated fat or carbs or cholesterol and each of these things, as we spend a decade or two going down that rabbit hole and saying we need to avoid fat, and the processed food industry brings out a whole lot of highly sugared, nutrient devoid products, and then we flip to the other extreme, and one specific nutrient, macronutrient particularly, is not really going to help us get to optimal nutrition. We need to find that optimal balance of all the different factors, and that's where I've tried to bring in insulin load, which is relevant for diabetes, nutrient density, which is really relevant for everybody, and then potentially energy density, which is another factor I've found to be useful if you've got enough body fat, your diabetes is under control, and you just want to lose some weight.
Sounds good. And one of the terms that I came across while scouring through your blog was metabolically healthy. So I was a little confused what was happening there. Would you like to elaborate on what it means by metabolically healthy or metabolic health here?
Yeah, basically an absence of diabetes, but everybody in our current society is really somewhere on that spectrum, and more and more people are becoming diabetic, and it's basically the elephant in the corner threatening to take over our health systems and our economy, and we're not going to be able to afford to keep all the metabolically unhealthy people who are obese and diabetic well, and that's a looming health issue. So I suppose what does metabolically healthy mean? Gerald Reaven coined the term a while ago, and Tim Noakes and other people have been talking about it. And I think it relates to diabetes, but in the end, it really just says we use fuel well, the fuel that we eat, the fuel that we throw at our system. We utilize that well. We churn through it and burn it, and we don't have it backing up in our system, whether it be high blood sugars or high free fatty acids in our blood, or even really high ketones, and we use that well. And I think what that means and how we get there is to have a good amount of lean muscle mass that's not inflamed and insulin resistant, and our mitochondria are optimally functioning with the nutrients that they have, and they're regularly exercised, and we've got a lack of inflammation and stress, and basically we're just efficient at using the energy.
Sounds good. So it seems like there's a lot of factors that are in place when it comes to being metabolically healthy. Is that a correct way to put it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So
yeah,
go ahead.
It's multifactorial, definitely.
Okay. So another question that I had from you is that there's this macronutrient which is considered very controversial, and I think where people listening to this know where I'm going with this, it's protein. So question, how much protein is too much and how much of it is too low for people? How do people figure that out? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's once you get rid of the processed carbohydrates and go keto and go low carb, and then the next thing is, well, what about protein? How much protein should I eat? And my analysis, one of the first things I stumbled across was the insulin index by the guys in the University of Sydney. Not just, you might have heard of the glycemic index, which calculates and quantifies our insulin response to food. But what the insulin index does, it actually measures the insulin response to food, which tells us that our insulin response to food is not just based on the carbohydrates, it's also influenced by the protein we eat and the fiber we eat, as well as the fructose, if you want to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further. But all of a sudden people go, well, if the protein I eat requires insulin, then it also must turn to glucose, because glucose requires insulin. So there's a little bit of lack of clarity, and it is true that the protein we eat can turn to glucose in emergency. It's called gluconeogenesis. That we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we can turn that protein into glucose, but a lot of people fear too much protein, potentially unnecessarily. And the long and the short of it, looking at it, is that it's hard to eat too much, and it's hard to eat too little protein if we just follow our appetite, because the appetite really is a good guide evolutionarily, we really make sure that we don't lose lean muscle mass. And if we're starting to lose our muscle mass, we really, our appetite upregulates and we go out looking for more protein. We make that a real priority and don't stop until we get enough protein, even if we have to eat a whole lot of other junk food to get that protein we need, because it's so critical for us. But at the same time, once we get enough protein to create our neurotransmitters and replenish our muscle and repair our muscle, because we can't easily turn it into any other fuel source, i.e. glucose, our appetite turns off. So there's a point where we just, they call it rabbit starvation. If you're just eating lean meat and only lean meat, it's hard to continue to eat that because we just can't use it. There's a whole range of different parameters. I mean, when we're fasting, we talk about we use up about 0.4 grams per kilo lean body mass. The recommended minimum is 0.6, which then gets rounded up to 0.8. A lot of people in the keto community talk about aiming for that low end to maximize ketosis because they want to keep insulin down, which is true. But at the same time, I've run the Nutrient Optimiser analysis on about 50 different people, and typically they're eating about 2.1 grams per kilogram lean body mass, which on average. So that's what people are typically actually eating when they're left to their own devices. Bodybuilders might eat a bit more. If you're not very active, you might not crave as much. So it really ranges, and I suppose the long and the short of it, it's hard to eat too much protein because our appetite switches off, and potentially we really need to be metabolically healthy to be repairing our muscles. So perhaps there's too much focus on too much protein.
Got it. And I think that's where we're going to go into the topic, which is very controversial among the low-carb community and the ketogenic community, which is gluconeogenesis, where people say, oh, if you eat too much protein, it's going to turn into a cake bomb or a sugar bomb. So what's happening in that case? Does it actually turn into a sugar bomb, or what are the mechanics? Let's get deep into it, because we've clarified it before when Luis was on there, but the debate and the discussion has still been there. So please go full nerd mode on this.
I wrote a long post on it looking at gluconeogenesis and what it means to some people. When they do eat protein, they do see their blood sugars raised, but typically for most people, when they eat a lot of protein, it displaces processed carbohydrates, so their blood sugars end up decreasing. So for most people, increasing protein content of their diet will actually decrease their blood sugars. But I suppose what does it mean if your blood sugars increase? What does it mean if it decreases? And it's probably worth going through the mechanics of what happens in your liver. So it's not just a matter of I eat protein and that protein immediately turns to glucose in my bloodstream. And if you're a type 1 diabetic, it may look like that. If you're an advanced type 2 diabetic, you may actually see that your blood glucose increases, but it's not actually that protein directly being converted to glucose in your body. So when we eat carbohydrates, our insulin in our pancreas is secreted to turn off the release of sugar from our liver. So basically that insulin stops the release of glucose into our bloodstream because we're getting glucose through our mouth, and it says, okay, I'm going to shut that off. So we can consider the insulin as a brake on our liver. So when we fast, when we don't eat, when we eat more fat, we've got another hormone which is sort of the counter-regulatory hormone. It's like the accelerator. It's called glucagon, which then stimulates glucose release from our liver to balance our blood sugars. So we really want to keep an even keel level of blood glucose in our bloodstream, just to fuel our brain. And it is critical to have some glucose running around, but not too much. And there's more and more people facing diabetes that have just got too much glucose floating around the bloodstream, but not processing well, that we talked about before, being not metabolically healthy. So potentially when my wife, who's type 1 diabetic, she has to when she has a large protein meal, she has to dose with insulin, and we have to refine those doses because as she metabolizes that protein using the insulin, that insulin helps convert the protein into muscle and repair, but it continues to be used up, and she needs to continue sometimes to dose with some more insulin. But what's happening there is really that she doesn't have enough insulin to suppress that the glucagon response that happens automatically for most people when they eat protein. So you've got the glucagon working well, but in a diabetic, you've got the insulin not working very well. So I suppose the question there, if you're seeing your blood sugars rise, is it a matter of I'm eating too much protein, or is it just a matter of maybe I don't have enough insulin? And that's where people with advanced type 2 diabetes potentially need some exogenous insulin. And if you're not working out, maybe you don't need to go hog wild on a whole lot of excess protein and protein shakes, and there's no need, and your appetite won't drive you to that. But yeah, it's an interesting balance point that it's potentially your insulin not functioning well. It's a lack of insulin because of your insulin resistance and your pancreatic beta cells burning out, not a matter of your protein turning directly into glucose, like chocolate cake per se. So yeah, it's a complex answer and a complex question, but I think it's important to understand. And coming from the perspective of type 1 diabetes, with my wife being type 1 diabetic, it's something I've had to think through, and an interesting question for the community to continue to grapple with.
Exactly. And that's something that a lot of communities, a lot of people in this field tell, is that this is a very complicated topic. It's not as easy as being out there. Even right now, for a person like myself, I had to literally read your blog 4 times to figure out what's going on. And if I have to take some time, I'm pretty sure there are other people who are going to be totally lost in this.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I've taken a couple of years to get my head around, and how the insulin and glucagon respond. And yeah, it's really important, and it's not as simple as, protein turns directly to chocolate cake in our blood, and therefore we need to fear it. Basically, we need to get enough protein to make sure we've got the neurotransmitters and happy hormones and our muscle being regenerated, so we can actually use the energy we throw at it. And we are metabolically healthy, so we can keep our blood sugars and free fatty acids down to a reasonable level.
And I think one of the things to note over here is that anything that has protein, correct me if I'm wrong, in its natural form comes with an additional carb or some sort of a fat. Protein doesn't come on its own as just protein unless it's a 99.999% meat, right?
Yeah, I mean, even whey protein is only 80% protein, the whey protein concentrate.
What?
So it's hard. It's hard, and the whey protein isolate is about 90% protein, but it also comes with a little bit of carbohydrate and a little bit of fat. And yeah, it's hard to get a pure protein meal. And that's what I've found. And if you look at the micronutrition you get from food at various extremes of low carb, high carb, low fat, high fat, low protein, high protein, you don't get really good. You don't get a really good micronutrient outcome. You don't get the vitamins and minerals if you're trying to aim for any of those extremes. Because in nature, like you said, that we get a whole range of different nutrients in real whole food, and you don't just get isolated protein. And we always focus so much on a target particular macronutrient ratio that we need, and that's interesting to help you potentially balance your blood sugars. But in reality, whole food is multifaceted and comes with a whole range of vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, and the essential amino acids that we need to get as well. But it's hard to not get enough protein if you're eating a whole food diet. You really have to go to extreme lengths to either fast or to eat a really high fat diet or a plant-based diet. Even a plant-based diet, you can get enough protein. It's only when you just start drinking MCT oil and butter and that you can really get to those low protein levels. And at that point, the vitamins and minerals aren't really there anymore.
Got it. So fun thought experiment, by the way, just to pry you a little bit. What would happen if somebody just chugs in protein shakes? That they get like their entire caloric intake from just protein. What would happen? Would the body just get destroyed, or what would happen? What do you think?
And I mentioned before that the rabbit starvation. If you're just eating lean protein, the term rabbit starvation came from when explorers, I think, had only these rabbits to eat and actually died because the lean protein that once they get enough protein, they just can't continue to eat, and even though there's plentiful amount of high protein foods. There's no fat, no carbs, so their appetite switches off and actually starve to death. But for most of us, we personally, and I've got plenty of body fat to continue to get me through, and it's not about to be a rabbit starvation. It's probably just more a protein-sparing modified fast, which is a term that's going around at the moment. And I wrote a blog post on it recently. It's basically utilizing that property of protein to get enough protein to prevent your lean muscle mass, and if you're a bodybuilder, to continue to support that lean muscle mass while minimizing fat, allowing that fat to come from your body. But at the same time, if you just chug protein powder, if you're a diabetic, you're going to have to deal with the insulin you need to respond to that. So there's no need to get a whole lot of excess protein, especially refined protein powder. And at the same time, like I mentioned, really, really high protein levels aren't going to give you the vitamins and minerals you need. So although at the same time, protein is the nutrient that seems to be most correlated with having a good micronutrient balance. So, yeah.
Got it. So one of the biggest gripes that certain people have in the ketogenic community is, hey, I'm not getting a high enough reading of the ketones on my ketone test strip or test meter. So what is causing that? I mean, everybody says, okay, chase results, don't chase high level of ketones. But how come some people have higher levels and other people have lower levels? Like with Finney, he had that diagram as well where he said, okay, this level to this level is fine, you're nutritional ketosis. But a lot of people come up to me and say, okay, we're not even getting to like 0.5 millimoles. So what's going on with those people?
To start with, having ketones in your blood is about your insulin. So if you've got too high insulin, your body fat isn't released to burn for fuel and you don't see high ketones. So it's good to have insulin levels that are low enough to allow your body fat to flow in and out of storage and not just be kept in storage. So that's a really critical thing, to make sure you have your carbohydrate load not too high. So if you're just pounding processed carbohydrates all the time, you're going to get to the point where your insulin levels increase and keep all your body fat in storage, which is a really bad thing. And that's why keto is so popular and it's just booming at the moment, because it is a really effective way to reduce your insulin and counteract that excessive processed carbohydrates that I suppose has been generated by the low fat craze, and the response the food industry has come at it with. But at the same time, if you don't get those high ketones, if you look at that chart, optimal ketone level is deemed to be between 1.5 and 3 millimolar. If you're fasting, potentially the first few times you fast, after 2 or 3 days, you can get those higher levels, and that's a healthy thing. And, I've had ketone levels of up to 8 when I did a 7-day fast one time, and it was like, wow, I felt amazing. And it's really, ketones fueling the brain is a real amazing feeling of euphoria. But as you adapt, as you get better at burning ketones, you'll see less ketones and spilling into the urine. And then I think in a similar way, you learn to metabolize those ketones in your blood more effectively, and those also start to drop down. So if then you're saying, well, my optimum ketone level is between 1.5 and 3, to get those high ketone levels, you have to start hammering a whole lot of butter and coconut oil and MCT oil, and at that point you're potentially driving an excess of energy in your body, which can then exacerbate insulin resistance, ironically, which is what you're trying to prevent. And I actually had Steve Finney stay here for a night when he spoke in Brisbane about 6 months ago, and what he said was, I said, how did you come up with those optimum ketone levels? And he said, well, one was in a weight loss study where they were underfeeding people and they were initially adapting to ketosis. So those higher ketone levels were with people who were initially adapting to keto. And another one was in a bike rider study where, again, they were about 8 weeks into adapting to keto. So, but I think what people are finding as keto becomes more popular and more and more people do it for longer, they don't see those high ketone levels. If you talk to Lewis, he's typically getting 0.2 to 0.4, Artie Dykman, a whole range of people who have been eating a low carb keto diet. Maybe they're eating protein, maybe they're exercising, and people are saying, you eat too much protein and too much muscle or whatever, and you're kicked out of keto. But these people are really obviously externally fit and healthy people, and you can't say, well, because your ketones are only 0.2, you're not healthy. Look at me, I'm, got ketones of 3, and, how'd you get that? Well, by eating a whole lot of butter and bacon and MCT oil. And are you losing weight? Well, no, but so it's a complex situation. And I think people, like Lewis says, you need to chase results, not just ketones. So it's good to get some ketones, and I've done an analysis of about 100 different people from various data sources, and most people in keto will have blood ketones between like 0.3 and 0.8 typically, but as I said, as you adapt more, it might even end up towards that 0.2, 0.3 level. And really, I think managing blood sugars, it should be your first priority, and then ketones is an interesting side issue, and then looking at your ketonics and your breath ketones is a whole other different thing, and it seems to be more your an indication of the fat you're burning rather than the fat that's ready in your blood to be used for energy. So it's a interesting topic. I hope that sort of answered the question. Oh,
this was really good. I'm pretty sure this was very helpful to a lot of people who are looking for higher ketone levels. But one of the things that I want to backtrack is you said that, correct me if I'm wrong, that you could be eating too much fat to the detriment of the ketones that are in your body because of insulin resistance that could, or insulin spike or something that could happen. Could you clarify that?
I mean, really, insulin resistance is your body saying you've got enough energy and I can't continue to take this energy and store it away in your body fat. So initially your body, you'll store energy in your body fat for later on when you're not eating. And then that'll build up, and you'll get to a point where you can't continue to store any more fat and grow your belly and your bum and your whatever. And the body will go, well, the adipose tissue is full. Let's turn to the parts of your body that are still insulin sensitive, like your pancreas and your liver and your brain and your eyes and whatever. And hence you get fatty liver and really extreme type 2 diabetes where your beta cells shut down, and Alzheimer's and macular degeneration. So it's just a situation where your body says, I'm full and I can't continue to store this energy. So potentially continuing to load up with a lot of processed fats and exogenous ketones and all this extra energy chasing high levels of blood ketones can, I think, drive that total energy up and up and up to the point that, you may have a bit of, euphoria because you've got high ketones, but actually driving a situation of insulin resistance that will be problematic in the long term.
That's fascinating. Really fascinating.
And a really important topic, I think, and something I've hammered on a little bit on the blog and on the Facebook group we've got.
Yeah, this is pretty much news to a lot of people who aren't aware of it. In fact, a lot of this is news to me as we're speaking. So that was really cool. But let's go off from this, actually. What would happen, or what kind of level of ketones is just detrimental? And the second part to that would be, are people who don't have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, can they attain that insane level of ketones to the detriment of their health?
Yeah, if you have type 1 diabetes, there's a situation called ketoacidosis, where you've got really high ketones that might be up at 20 or 30. Basically, your blood sugar, your blood ketone meter will read up to 8. And if you're getting over 8, it's basically a warning sign that you've got not enough insulin going on. So it's really hard to get those really high levels if you've got a normal basal healthy level of insulin and your pancreas is still producing insulin. And if you get really, really high ketones, it's likely that you've also got high blood sugars. And that's the situation with a newly diagnosed or an undiagnosed type 1 diabetic, and they get ketoacidosis, and quickly they get insulin these days, and that stops their body basically disintegrating. So the short answer is, if you're not a type 1 diabetic, there's no need to be particularly worried about high levels of ketones. And if you've got a normally functioning pancreas, you'll have low enough levels of blood sugar and blood ketones that won't really be a problem. But I suppose at the same time, there's a situation called metabolic acidosis that sort of edging up all the time with high levels of ketones and not enough minerals. I know all the keto gurus talk about getting enough electrolytes, which is your magnesium, potassium, calcium, sodium, that help balance the acidity of the diet with alkalines. So if you continue to drive high levels of protein and high levels of ketones without the minerals to balance that back, your kidney has to continue to work really hard to maintain a normal pH. And you don't really have to worry about it too much, but if you continue to drive that too hard all the time, I think it can overstress the kidney, and basically your control may disintegrate and decrease over time.
Got it. So that was the definition for how metabolic acidosis could potentially happen if you're just eating a lot of fats and proteins and not focusing on those electrolytes as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why you don't feel so good, the low-carb flu, the keto flu, and people say you need those electrolytes, which you can get through taking extra salt or magnesium or eating green leafy veggies.
Man, my favorite one is avocado. Seems to be like the solution to the entire universe's problem.
Good avocado is delicious, isn't it?
How does, just to go a little off topic, how does it score on the Nutrient Optimiser?
Yeah, avocado is great in terms of it's got plenty of fat, which is good if you're diabetic, and it's got a lot of potassium, which is fantastic. Overall nutrient density in terms of the harder to find nutrients divided by calories, which is nutrient density, it's not so good because it's so energy dense. But yeah, that's a complex topic, and most people should enjoy their avocado, and if it feels good, enjoy it.
I'm reading between the lines. It sounds like you just offended me by just saying that it's not as good.
I ate avocado with some bacon and eggs about an hour ago, and it was delicious.
All right, let's go back to something that I found very interesting on your blog, which was basal and basal insulin levels. So
bolus insulin.
Oh wait, sorry, correct me.
Basal and bolus insulin.
Could you spell that?
BOLUS. So
bolus. Okay.
Yeah.
I totally screwed up the spellings in my notes. All right. I'm sorry about that. All right. Bolus and basal insulin levels. Yeah, so what's the difference between these two? And so what's going on? What's the story there?
Yeah, what's the story? So if you fast, your pancreas is still producing insulin basically to stop you disintegrating and your muscles and everything else just falling apart and being used for energy. And that's what happens with an uncontrolled type 1 diabetic, that they don't have that insulin to keep all their body energy, their fat, their muscles and everything from being used for fuel. And they can't utilize well the energy that they're eating. So, and that's where it's really important that a type 1 diabetic will get injections of insulin. They quickly correct that situation and regain the weight. And sometimes too much weight, and people like Jason Fung have pointed out that we're over-insulinizing our type 1 diabetics because of the really high-carb diet. So it's really important. I suppose I talk a lot about type 1 diabetes because that's my context, but that helps us understand how we optimize the right insulin levels if we're type 1 diabetic, type 2 diabetic, or metabolically healthy. So it gives us a really interesting window. So a type 1 diabetic on a day-to-day basis they've typically got an insulin pump, which will just drip out every few minutes a little bit of insulin that will mimic what a normal pancreas will do to continue to give that basal insulin that it is irrespective of what you eat. But then the bolus insulin is when you see food, smell food, and then eat food, your pancreas will pump out insulin to respond to that food, to metabolize it, to turn it into energy, to help you repair your muscles, and maybe to store it if there's excess amounts. So that'll also switch off your liver from, as we said before, releasing the energy in your liver into your bloodstream. So in a normal person eating a normal Western diet, it's about half and half. Half of the insulin that the pancreas produces is their basal insulin, and about half is for their food, their bolus insulin. But once someone goes to a low-carb or keto diet, that increases to about 70% being their basal insulin, only about 30% being their bolus insulin. And that's really important, and that really helps correct and stabilize the blood sugar roller coaster. So somebody who's diabetic who suddenly goes to a low-carb or keto approach is not having to secrete or inject as much insulin, and they get a massive improvement. And sometimes because of that initial change in their diet, they improve their weight control, and they're able to, because they don't have as much insulin circulating, they're able to release all that excess stored body fat for fuel. But at the same time, you get to a point where you you've squeezed all you can out of your diet, and I think you need to start focusing on your basal insulin, and you can manipulate and do things through improving your lean muscle mass and insulin, nutrient density, and other things, decreasing toxins, decreasing stress, that will improve your basal insulin sensitivity to continue to improve your decrease the amount of insulin you need to overall improve your health. So I suppose the takeaway from that is you can take it only so far with your diet, and then you need to focus on nutrient density and your overall activity and muscle mass.
Yeah, and that brings us to a very important conclusion that, as you were mentioning, at least in the low-carb people, that the 70% is the basal, which is dependent on your lifestyle choices, the kind of nutrient density. Is that one of them as well? And then... Yep. And then, of course, the 30% is your actual food consumption. So just food for thought for people who are into the low-carb world and are interested in how insulin... Which brings me to an interesting question now that we've sort of figured out or kind of noticed the 70-30 rule, if you want to call it. Do you think that in our industry, we seem to point a lot of fingers to carbs in general? Do carbs still have that deep impact, that insulin impact, knowing this, the 70-30 rule now? Processed
carbs are guilty of most of what they're charged with. I think our food industry very easily serves us up a bunch of highly sugared and processed, full of processed grains and high fructose corn syrup that we happily buy because it's cheap and tastes good. And those carbs are not so good. But when it comes to non-starchy veggies, I just don't think people should be too afraid of anything that's green and fibrous, and that's probably going to help them improve the vitamin and mineral intake, which will help drive their mitochondria and probably help improve their basal insulin sensitivity. So, yeah, there's carbs and carbs, and if it's from a whole, unprocessed or lowly processed source, then you probably don't need to be as worried about carbohydrates. So non-starchy green veggies are great.
Okay, so now I have a really basic question, which is how does... Actually, I think we've already discussed that. How does insulin inhibit fat loss, unless you have something else to add to it? Just to reinforce that the insulin turns off the outflow of energy from the liver. So your liver stores all the energy from the food you eat ready to be released into the bloodstream. So if we've got high levels of insulin, the energy in our body just keeps on backing up, and the brake is continually on. So we need to decrease the insulin load of our diet, but also potentially, increase the time between our meals. That's the intermittent fasting to enable that insulin level to decrease and let the energy from our liver and our fat stores just flow out into the bloodstream. Okay. So now here's an interesting question. So we've known this term called skinny fat.
Yeah.
So what is going on in those people as far as the role of insulin is concerned? Or they seem to look amazing on the outside, but seem to be quite unhealthy. What's happening in their bodies?
Yeah, another term is toffee, which is thin on the outside, fat on the inside, where they, like you said, they look okay, but their liver and their pancreas and potentially their brain and their eyes and all their vital organs are becoming more and more fatty. What happens is it seems to be Dr. David Unwin's done some interesting investigations and noticed that different people have a personal fat threshold where your body fat can continue to expand, and the people who are able to take on a whole lot of body fat are potentially more metabolically healthy sometimes, that they can continue to get bigger before their adipose tissue says, no, thank you, I'm full. We need to go somewhere. Your fat needs to go somewhere else, like your liver and your pancreas and your brain and your eyes. So, skinny fat is potentially just a false sense of security that the food you're eating is okay for you, but really it's maybe backing up on your liver and your pancreas earlier.
So would it be smart to say that obesity is one of the symptoms of insulin resistance, just one of them?
Yeah, and there's plenty of people who are skinny with really high blood sugars, and I think coming from the diabetes headspace, it's good to occasionally check your blood sugars. No need to obsess on it unless you're need to be taking insulin potentially, but understanding that you've got a healthy blood sugar equivalent to a metabolically healthy person is really important.
So here's a question, just going off from this actually. Is there something in like regular medical checkups or in hospitals or when you go to your doctor, is there something that these people are not looking at as far as type 2 diabetes is concerned? Are they missing out on certain biomarkers, or is there some way to better guide people who are diabetics on this matter?
Oh, yeah. Complex question. But a lot of the time the focus is on the cholesterol in your blood, your LDL, your HDL and whatever. And but I think looking at your fasting glucose is an important factor, and typically that is taken as well. And the current cutoffs for diabetes and acceptable glucose levels are well above optimal. if you look at a healthy person, they might have a blood sugar of 4.6 or 83 millimoles in millimoles per deciliter in US measurements. But the cutoffs for pre-diabetes and full-blown diabetes are much higher than that. I think people need to take notice well before they're pre-diabetic, because by the time they're pre-diabetic, they're vastly metabolically unhealthy and are already well in trouble. So rather than focusing quite so much on the HDL and LDL that might lead you to taking a statin drug, and that if you want to use conspiracy theories, 78% of people qualify for needing a statin drug, but looking at your blood sugars and maybe modifying your diet to normalize the blood sugars is a more important approach.
Okay. So let's say I'm a type 2 diabetic or a type 1 diabetic. We can use both those examples. And I come to your website and I'm like, I need to start optimizing my nutrition. So what do I do?
Yeah, so the insulin is a problem, and you in a type 1 diabetic or even type 2 diabetic, if they're eating sugar and then their pancreas needs to dose for that sugar that they've eaten, and all of a sudden their blood sugars are going up and down, the insulin's going up and down, they need to eat again more quickly because they can't access their body fat for fuel, and it's just a perpetuating cycle that they're always hungry because they can't get at their own body fat for fuel. So key to optimize that is to decrease the insulin load of your diet, and that's proportional to the carbohydrates minus the fiber plus about half the protein. So if we start, potentially that person can start eating more fat and then dropping the carbohydrate, the processed carbohydrate, particularly out of the diet. So cutting out sugars and sodas, and that'll get them a long way. All of a sudden they'll find that they can more easily go longer between meals, and they'll feel energized because their body fat will flow out of storage, and they'll think this is the most amazing thing ever. But then once their blood sugars start to normalize, I think there's another step that people aren't currently focusing on as much, is then to turn to, well, how can I improve the quality of my diet to maximize the nutrient density? So that's sort of where the website is, the approach is to say, well, yeah, you're going to start here, start to drop your blood sugars, and then start to then increase the nutrient density and support exercise and movement and activity.
Got it. So without, actually, you know what? I'm going to pitch you right against the group of people who call themselves the zero carbers. So someone who focuses on a lot of nutrient density, I would imagine you find it, I don't know if you do, but if I were you, I would find it weird that these people are eating nothing but protein-based food and literally no carbs. So what do you have to say to those people without actually starting a fight? Unless you want to. I won't stop you.
Zero carb is a really interesting phenomenon, and people a lot of the time who have been eating crappy processed food for a long time will get really exacerbated overgrowth in their gut of bad bacteria, and all of a sudden they find zero carb and cut out all fiber and all processed food, and they feel fantastic, and they get relief from their gut issues, and gut issues are always related to autoimmunity, and it's a very challenging situation, and more power to them if they find a solution that improves that. A lot of the recommended daily intakes for the various nutrients are based on people who are eating a normal Western diet, and there's probably some basis to say, well, that people who aren't eating as much glucose may not need as much vitamin C. But at the same time, as we talked about before, a lot of the keto gurus talk about the importance of calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium supplementation, which are all those nutrients that come with your green leafy veggies, and you're not getting as much without that. So you can do pretty well if you have a zero carb diet with some offal or some shellfish and can get a fairly solid level of nutrients there. The nutrients you're typically missing out on zero carb are vitamin C, manganese, vitamin E, vitamin K, vitamin A, vitamin D, which is hard to get anyway, folate, calcium, magnesium, potassium, copper. And that they are a fair bit lower on a zero carb diet, but at the same time, there's a whole lot of people who do really well. But I imagine potentially if you strip your diet back to a zero carb, maybe in time you can start to incorporate some green leafy veggies if your gut tolerates it, and maybe in time to a autoimmune protocol that isn't exacerbating the digestive issues that people benefit from a zero carb approach. So yeah, I mean, if it works for you, then more power to you. But at the same time, I'm trying to tweak the Nutrient Optimiser to find ways to optimize their diets as well. And I've done a few zero carbers, and it's been a really interesting learning experience. And just Sean Baker's a 50-year-old guy who's setting world records with zero carb and doing really well. And he had a similar sort of journey that he was just pounding a whole lot of processed carbohydrates and then went paleo and low carb and then keto and targeted keto, which was carving up occasionally, and then went, well, I feel really bad when I eat these processed carbs. I'll just cut out all carbs. I'm at zero carb and just eats meat. He's doing great. So more power to him. Is that optimal for long term? I don't know. And there's not a lot of data, and it'd be great to study that situation more.
Got it. And it seems like over here, the main point here is that do benefits of going zero carb outweigh the negatives of maybe deficient in a couple of things or a few things that may not be in your zero carb diet? Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah. And digestive issues is hell. And you may want to supplement, you may want to test and find out if you're deficient in anything. Is it optimal for everybody? Probably not. But people say there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, but at the same time, there's a whole bunch of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that come with carbohydrates, such as green leafy veggies. So yeah.
Yeah, and the truth over here from what you're telling me is that you're not actually against zero carbs, but what you're trying to do here is try to accommodate the zero carbs and make sure that they have a nutrient dense of foods as possible.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
And another thing that I'm getting over here is that a lot of people have their own issues, and some people might not even thrive on a ketogenic diet where even that tiny bit of carbs might be an issue for them. So it seems like one of the things people can do is let's say if you're a diabetic or if you've been a carber your entire life and you're facing issues, is just go super simple mode and start building from that infrastructure. Be your own scientist and figure out what works for you. Is that a good way to conclude this?
Yeah, no, definitely. And strict keto and therapeutic keto can do wonders for people to strip out everything and just eating butter and bacon and throwing some avocado and olive oil in can make people feel fantastic if they've been suffering the distress of excess carbohydrates. But potentially that's a starting point where they can then bring back more nutrient-dense foods to continue that journey in the fullness of time.
So here's a question which is getting on my mind now is, what are some of the pitfalls or some of the things that people in the low carb or ketogenic community, they aren't doing right or they're doing it wrong as far as nutrition and nutrient density is concerned, or some things that they're lacking in? Do you have something for those people or us in general?
I mean, more power to you if you've really struggled with obesity and diabetes and you trying to be politically correct and sensitive to those people who do really well on butter and bacon and eggs and just do fantastically. But that may be just a transition point, and you need to go, okay, I'm here, I've improved, and what I've tried to create is a bit of a methodology where you say, where are you now? Where do you want to get to? Where's your next step? And you can use things like your body weight or waist circumference or blood sugars or how you feel to say, well, I've moved down the road a little bit. What's my next step? And you may move from therapeutic keto, really high fat, 70 or 80%, and then you do really well for a period and then go, well, I've stagnated. Where do I go next? Maybe I need to start bringing in more nutrient-dense foods, more green leafy veggies, and, continue to test my blood sugars and, okay, they're okay. Maybe I can drop out a bit of the added dietary fat to let the fat come from my body, and then you may become more active and go to the gym, and you need a few sweet potatoes or whatever to fuel that, and then all of a sudden you've got on keto gains with Lewis and you're lifting heavy weights. You go, well, how do I recover from this? I need more protein to support that growth. And it's a journey, and there's different contexts, and I suppose there's not one solution that fits all situations. And hopefully you're on a journey that people who are very sick and need a lot of help can continue that journey towards continually improving towards optimal.
Got it. So let's move to your big project, the Nutrient Optimiser. You're engineering a dream come true, I would imagine, where you're just like tearing things down into pieces. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the focus here is on micronutrients that are very deficient in food, like, for example, full fat or pure milk, for example, or some of those other things that people think, oh, it's really healthy, but what about the nutrition density? There's nothing really in there. So would you like to elaborate on the importance of micronutrients rather than just macros on their own?
Yeah. I've tried to develop a number of different cheat sheet lists, although, like you've said, the blog goes into the weeds and goes down the rabbit hole a lot, and some people get a bit lost in my 5,000 word posts every week or two. But I've tried to create a bunch of optimal food lists for different situations that, when we started out as a family, we printed it out and stuck it on the fridge and sort of went, these are the foods we need to eat more of. Sometimes you go to family gatherings or parties or whatever, and there's foods that aren't on that list that you happen to eat. But as a general rule, eating more of those foods, for us, it was the nutrient-dense, diabetes-friendly list that we tried to eat more and more of. And there's a whole range of different lists for different people, whether they be, trying to aim for therapeutic keto or just managing diabetes, or bodybuilders, or losing weight, or autoimmune protocol. And at the moment, I'm developing a whole lot more lists that people can then help them. But different, you don't just eat those foods. So I thought, well, maybe we can individualize it to different people and say, well, what are you currently eating? Which micronutrients are you currently missing out on? And what foods can we tailor to your current situation to, hey, you should eat more of this and maybe less of that, to suit your current situation, to continually rebalance your diet at a micronutrient level. So there's 40-something essential micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and essential fatty acids, which are basically omega-3s. But we don't need more of all of those. Typically, it's easy to get, as we talked about before, the amino acids. So a lot of the time, people don't need to worry too much about getting more amino acids. It's the magnesium, potassium, calcium, manganese, vitamin A, vitamin D that people typically need more of, but that's specific to each particular person, their current diet and their current preferences. And so what the Nutrient Optimiser does, it takes their current food log. Currently we're tracking it in Chronometer. So we can take an output from Chronometer, which is a bit like MyFitnessPal, but looks at micronutrients. It's a free app on your phone or on the website. I then take that output, run it through a spreadsheet and say, well, these are the nutrients you're not getting enough of. And then, hey, if your goal is bodybuilding or diabetes management or therapeutic keto, these are the foods that you should try to eat more of. Next time you go shopping, here's a shopping list that you should eat more of those foods. And then it'll continue to work with you as your blood sugars improve, as your muscle mass improves, as your energy levels improve, to continually refine your diet and continue to rebalance that at a micro and macronutrient level to both optimize your blood sugars, but also optimize your micronutrients at the same time. So yeah, it's a really exciting project. Currently, we've run about 50 people through using a manual spreadsheet type system. And we're working with a mate who's a database guru to turn that into an automated process where I can, just upload the file and it'll punch out a report based on your current situation and goals. And in fullness of time, it'll be a web interface and maybe an app that, I think it'd be really exciting if you go, I'm planning a meal for the weekend. What does the app tell me I should be eating more of? And I'll go shopping and buy more of that. And it's sort of like a menu planner, a continual personal fitness coach and chef to help you to optimize your food choices to cover off on your micronutrients as well as your macronutrients and optimize your health. So yeah, it's potentially very exciting. And thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about it and share the word and get the word out there.
And the reason why I have been so much in love with the Optimizer is that, one of the reasons is because I love sardines, and I think they're the most romantic gift you can give to anyone because of how cheap and nutrient dense they are. But the reality is that I think it's about time we, as a food industry, start focusing on stop focusing on too much deliciousness and addictive foods and start focusing on the health of our consumers, which would involve focusing on micronutrients and, of course, creating a good balance of macros as well. So your project here could pave a way for a lot of food companies to prove their mettle when it comes to people's health is concerned. But unless you have something to add over here, I have a question here, which is, can micros be consumed to the detriment of someone's health? Like the extreme side of consuming too much iron maybe, or any of those micros, can people cause that harm to themselves?
Well, just to touch on the first point you mentioned there, I think it would be really exciting if we could use this ranking to give a score to foods. At the moment, the nutritional, I don't know what you have in America, but in Australia, we've got a star rating, and you get 4 stars if you're low in salt and low in cholesterol and low in fat and low in taste. But we flavored it with fake flavorings, so it tastes okay, and you get 5 stars if you pay $10,000 a year. And that's just probably worse than useless, because it's misleading people to preference foods which have a minimal level of actual nutrition in them. So I'd love, in the fullness of time, this sort of system to give a quantitative basis to really grade foods on their micronutrient content, not just what they're flavored to taste like. A lot of the time, foods are just flavored to taste like they're nutrient dense, and we keep on eating more of them because they taste good. But we're not evolutionarily, we haven't caught up with the fact that foods that taste good aren't nutrient dense. So in the fullness of time, that'd be really exciting to be able to use this technology to improve that situation, to actually rank foods. On the can you get too much of a good thing? You can get too much iron, particularly men don't have a way to get rid of the iron that they're eating. So, other than giving blood, so you can get hemochromatosis. It is possible to get too much vitamin A, potentially from liver. I think that's the only situation where I've found that people can overdo a nutrient in the wild situation, but the situations where people have actually eaten too much vitamin A is where they've been starving and come across a polar bear and eaten their liver and then got sick from eating too much vitamin A from the liver. But that's not going to happen too often. Typically, people find it hard to overdo micronutrients from real food. I suppose the downside of nutrient-dense foods is that typically it's hard to eat a lot of asparagus and watercress and broccoli and spinach and liver, and all of a sudden you go, okay, I can't eat any more of this because it's so filling, and so they actually need to get some fat into them to get the energy. So it's sort of a two-pronged process of, you need the nutrients, but you also need the energy if you're active and moving, and potentially somebody who's an athlete will need to focus on energy density as well, so they can get enough energy down the pie hole to move and race that Ironman triathlon. But at the same time, most people are probably needing a little less energy density and to allow some body fat to come from their own fat stores to be used. So,
got it.
Yeah, you can overdo the supplementation, but most of the time the gut gives you a pretty good indication that you've had too much of whatever that particular supplement is.
So does the gut actually point to us if we're overdoing it or if we've had enough macros? Is there some correlation here?
Yeah. I mean, if you take too much magnesium or potassium or salts, you can end up on the toilet and go, okay, maybe I overdosed at that point. And the body has a pretty good way of saying, that'll be enough, thanks. But if you're eating whole foods, it's hard to overdo that.
Okay. So here's an interesting one. A lot of people take multivitamins.
Yep.
So what's your thought on that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Or is that a lazy thing?
Can we choose D, all of the above? I take
Okay.
a multivitamin and probably plenty of supplements at the same time, because the natural food these days is grown using a whole lot of petrochemical fertilizers in soil that has had the same crop in it from year and year. So even the vegetables and the things that are meant to be nutritious, even our farmed beef is fed on a whole lot of grains and things that aren't really so nutrient dense. So I suppose some supplementation can be a bit of an insurance policy, and particularly that's where the Nutrient Optimiser will be able to tell you and say, hey, these are the foods you're currently eating, and these are the nutrients you're not getting enough of, and maybe you should consider supplementing with those particular nutrients rather than having to throw the whole kitchen sink at it. The Nutrient Optimiser will enable you to target your supplementation and maybe save a bit of money.
Got it. So this leads me to this next question, which is, we all know that, okay, you need this much macros or that much. There's the unending argument going on. Do we have an unending argument as far as micronutrients are concerned? In other words, how can people figure out what kind of micronutrients they need? Because when it comes to macros, we have like this big argument.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that to start happening with micronutrients.
No, I'm already picking some of those fights and having some of those discussions, and it's leading me to do a whole bunch of research, which is really interesting. So, some of the recommended daily intake levels that are set by the government, the people say, well, they're based on people who are eating a normal Western diet, and the situation will be different for different people who are eating zero carb or keto or low carb, which is probably the case to a large extent. And at the same time, there's nutrients in the recommended daily intakes that are based on this is just what the average population was eating, so we'll set the target levels at that. But at the same time, there's a whole bunch of testing of, people were deficient in magnesium, deficient in vitamin C, deficient in calcium, deficient in potassium, or the potassium sodium balance was out, and this led to this deficient health situation. And there's solid evidence for a bunch of those things, which is really fascinating. But if you've seen some of the Nutrient Optimiser graphs, it basically ranks, well, these are the ones you're getting plenty of, and these are the ones you're getting not a lot of. So, hey, how about you just focus on the foods that contain more of the ones you're not getting a lot of, and whether that's you're getting 80% or 110% or 200% of the recommended daily intake, it's sort of irrelevant, because a lot of them you're probably getting 10 times the recommended daily intake of various nutrients. So those arguments can be, I think there's still a basis for focusing on the ones you're getting less of compared to the recommended daily intake, but not just a single nutrient. And again, you come back to the single macronutrients. I think focusing on single micronutrients is also problematic, but if you focus on the group of 7 or 10 micronutrients that you're not currently getting enough of, and what are the real foods that contain those, you're in pretty safe territory.
Yeah, because you know that, and I know that once this low carb, high carb debate gets settled, once these macros are in motion and set, we know we're coming after your Nutrient Optimiser. So all the nerds, just to wait for that storm. It's about to come. It's right around the corner.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for this to be really useful for a lot of people. I just have to get it set up. At the moment, I'm just doing manual analysis. And like I said, I've done about 50, and it takes me an hour or two, and there's a nominal charge to do that. But once we automate it, it'll be quite cost effective for a lot of people, and hopefully be a thing that helps a lot of people improve their health. And yeah, living with that myself and seeing the benefit of, for my wife and for myself and for communities of people out there who have just, turned their health around, and their quality of life is so vastly improved. It's like, well, here's a worthy goal. And I think you feel the same, that, educating people and helping people to improve the food that they eat is such a critical part, a critical, important goal, a worthy challenge.
So where do you see what's the future that you see with the Optimiser?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, and a lot of people have really responded well to it, and just can continue to develop as probably a web app, and then probably a phone app, and which will then help you to retrain your diet and continue to work with you. And then there's a whole pile of different aspects and add-ons that we've got in the pipeline that continue to roll out. And as more people take it on, we'll be able to develop those further. Unfortunately, automated databases and apps and everything take time and money, but it's good to have a day job that'll support the habit in the meantime.
Yeah, man. And that's one of the fascinating things about a lot of low carb communities and communities online in general, is that everybody seems to have a day job that is totally irrelevant to the nutrient lifestyle. And it's like living the Batman life, where you're just Bruce Wayne throughout the entire day, and you come home and now you're like a crime fighting, saving the earth sort of vigilante. So that seems to be
a fun hobby.
It's a trend among many people in the low carb community, I've noticed. It's not their full-time gig, which is interesting, because that's forcing this change eventually it's going to start forcing this change in policies and some of the health stuff that's going on in our country. So that I thought was hilariously awesome.
Yeah. The power of social media to educate people and create a groundswell that's going to, the mainstream is going to have to take notice of or become irrelevant. It's really powerful and fascinating. So yeah, I've started a Optimizing Nutrition Facebook group that's now got about 6,000 people, and it's just a bunch of really amazing, generous, smart, interesting people that become my friends, and they live in LA and London and South Africa and wherever. And yeah, it's just a real trip and really addictive and real dopamine rush. And, it's great to write a post and share it and get really good responses. And you go, well, okay, that was great. I'll do it again. And yeah, it's a really, really fun hobby and really exciting time in nutrition.
Yeah. So, but one question to backtrack just a little bit is, can focusing on micronutrients go way too far as the food is concerned? Do you see something that could be problematic for people?
Yeah, I suppose I touched on
the vitamins. Yeah.
really completely zealous and going, well, I'm only going to eat my watercress and broccoli and celery and liver, then, you probably need to get a grip of reality and chill out, dude. And, and people can get neurotic. And I don't want this to be something that it's another thing for people to get neurotic about. I want it to be an accurate educator that then they can go, well, I've retrained my palate by eradicating the crap out of my diet, and then I can naturally choose well based on my appetite. So that's why it's not just eat this, this, and this. It's here's 100 different foods that are going to work well for you. What takes your fancy and enjoy. And I think animals in the wild know what they need. You take my dog to the park and they'll munch on some grass, and they look at the sheep and cattle in the wild, and they go to this bush and then that bush, and they know what they need. So if we take the hyper-palatable, fake, artificially flavored foods out of our diet, we'll then get to the point where we can trust our own intuition and just enjoy food again, and go for the things that taste good to our palate and our appetite, and listen to that, which will probably lead to better health than just following a script all the time. But I think this will be a bit of a rehab process that we'll be able to say, well, this is definitely more nutrient dense than that, and this is better for your insulin load, for your diabetes than that food, and it'll help educate people to the point that then they're free to make mature choices.
Got it. So this leads me to this interesting question. You've tried Soylent. I've tried Soylent. A lot of people have tried Soylent. And just for those people who don't know what Soylent is, it's basically powdered food that you put into water and you consume it 4 times a day or 3 times a day. And that is supposed to cover up all your daily nutrition intake and basically food for life with just one drink. You're like a dog that's eating nothing but kibbles. So do you think this could potentially be the future of humanity, where you have drinks for your entire life? I mean, I can totally see, before you answer, I can totally see people listening to this podcast just complaining that, you'll be an idiot missing out on this beautiful food experience if you do that, and you might destroy humanity. So what's your take on this?
Oh, wow. Manufactured foods. I haven't actually tried Soylent. I've tried some replacements, but I did get my head into like 5 years ago when it was being developed and trialed in the US, and I was in Australia and I couldn't get hold of it. I was quite fascinated by the way people were trying to design manufactured food to give them all those micronutrients. And I suppose I learned a lot from that community. It was a fascinating little rabbit hole. And I tried to design my own little, shake with a few nutrients I ordered from the States through Amazon, and some protein powder and nuts and coconut oil. And I think I ended up getting a whole lot fatter on that because it was, I just kept chugging these shakes. And it didn't go well, and I think there's some place for food replacements, but I think there's a whole lot of micronutrients that we probably haven't quantified yet, beyond just the 40 essential vitamins and minerals that we know about, that aren't going to be in those foods. That if we go tick, 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 if we focus on real whole foods, they're going to get all those other micronutrients that we don't know about yet. But beyond that, it tastes good, it's pleasurable, it's hard to overeat. There's a whole lot of fiber and bulk and in real food. So yeah, maybe meal replacements have their place to some degree, but they're not as good as real food. And if you compare, one of the posts I'm looking at doing is doing an analysis on meal replacements like Soylent and Ample or whatever, and saying how does it compare to spinach and broccoli and liver, and I think those manufactured foods will be way down the list. So yeah.
You do realize that once your optimizer goes popular, all the organ meat pricing is going to start skyrocketing. So you're.
We'll see. We'll see. It's an acquired taste.
I'm pointing fingers right at you, dude, because if that happens, and if I don't get my liver and it starts to go like $20 a pound, it's your fault. I'm coming after you.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, do you have anything else to add here that we can discuss or you want to share with the people? If not, we can start wrapping up the podcast because I have some really.
I think we've fulfilled the name, lived up to the name of Keto Geek, and hopefully we haven't gone too far down the rabbit hole, and hopefully it's been clear and interesting to people listening.
Oh yeah, let's start talking about fasting. What do you think about that?
I'm a proponent of fasting for people who need it. I suppose the flip side, it's not for everybody. And if you're active and lifting and not too fat, then you probably need to eat more regularly. And again, your appetite will generally help you with that. But sometimes we need a bit of extra help. And one thing I did a post on Lady Rebecca, who's got this fasting group that looks at tweaking your meal timing based on your scales, which is interesting. I think that's a fair guide to say, I want to lose weight. I'm going to skip eating today, or, not eat breakfast today because I haven't achieved my target weight that I was hoping for. Or I think a better place to start for people with diabetes, there's another post that I've done that looked at using your blood sugar to give you feedback. So, do I need to eat? Is my blood sugar high? Maybe I don't need to eat because my energy levels are still up there, and wait for those blood sugars to drop, and that'll help you recalibrate your appetite. And then, eventually it's all about retraining to let your appetite naturally guide you. But we live in such a messed up food society that we need sometimes those artificial things to help us retrain and move towards optimal.
Got it. Yeah. Well, we could get into
controversial topic, though, isn't it?
Yeah. This fasting is something that even I need to educate myself eventually before I can even have a conversation. So I think this will be a topic for the future. But I would love to come back to it on our Keto Geek podcast as well.
That'd be fun.
And so let's start ending this podcast. And so, what are some of the resources or ways people can educate themselves in this vast world called internet, which is loaded with too much information? How can they simplify things for themselves? And I'm talking to a person who blows things out of proportion as far as simplicity is concerned. And I'm going to say, man, your posts are really deep, really elaborate.
They're pretty epic, aren't they?
Yeah, they're like a 2-hour movie feature length. I would say, yeah, you're a feature length poster. So what do you have for us poor folks?
I'm involved with the Low Carb Down Under group in Australia, and they post a whole pile of excellent videos. They're really popular and really thorough people. Tim Noakes, Gary Fettke, et cetera, and they've done a couple of US Breckenridge conferences as well. People like Ted Naiman has been on there, and his post on his presentation on insulin is excellent. So anything by Ted Naiman is fantastic. I've got a Optimising Nutrition Facebook group that again is for the people who this is their hobby and they love to get into the weeds a little bit. For people who are into being active and the bodybuilder type community, Lewis and the Keto Gains group is really spot on. The type 1 grit group, if anybody's diabetic, particularly type 1 diabetic, it's fantastic guidance, and that group with Artie Dykman, following the recommendations of Dr. Bernstein, has basically changed our life and set us on this journey. So there's a whole lot out there, but at the same time, there's a whole lot of conflicting, confusing advice, and everybody has to find their approach. As I said before, if you go back to the food lists on the blog, if you go to Optimizing Nutrition, and there's a drop down called Optimal Food Lists, and you can go through that and just find the shopping list that's ideal for you in your current situation, and whether you want to lose weight or normalize your blood sugars. Check that out and just pin it to your fridge and eat from that and stay off the internet and get outside and see the sun.
Yeah, well, that definitely. We're turning into a very luxury and consumer-based society where we don't quite enjoy discomfort and a little bit of unhappiness, not unhappiness, but struggle in life. So we could definitely use a little bit of sun.
And that's the thing. Everybody needs to be on their journey and find the thing, their challenge, whether it be exercise or weightlifting or saving the world from nutrition, or need to be out there doing something and making a difference in the world.
Unless you're Ted Naiman, then you're like God.
He's achieved optimal.
He's one of the coolest people in the low carb community, and I really respect him as well. Along with all the people that you've mentioned, and a lot of these communities that have been formed as well as far as the low carb world is concerned, and even I would imagine people who are even in the high carb. I mean, I don't know. Am I entering the enemy domains now? Did I say something wrong?
No. It is the Keto Geek podcast, but there's plenty of intelligent people out there that I've learned from as well. So it's interesting to throw yourself into vegan groups and whatever groups and just see what you can learn from them.
And the reality is, we as educators, well, you primarily, not me, I'm just an ignorant fool, but people need to keep their mind open, because we've spent the last few decades in dogma preaching things that were based on very bad studies. And it's about time that we become our own scientists, because the reality is health is important. You do live once, as cliche as it sounds. So make it a good, worthy experience. So Marty, were you going to say something?
No, I fully agree. And, it's all about quality of life and thinking well and feeling good. And it's worth it.
All right. So now, would you like to, in this ending moment, plug yourself in? How can people find you? What are some of the ways?
Yeah, just go check out optimizingnutrition.com, or turn that around. It's nutrientoptimiser.com is the tool that I'm developing. There's a Facebook group called Optimizing Nutrition, which is an awesome bunch of people. If you've got any questions and want to discuss, it's a really amazing, supportive community. I'm on Twitter under Optimizing Nutrition. I've also got another Facebook group that you can just follow the posts or subscribe to get the posts on a weekly or fortnightly basis whenever I get around to finishing my epic posts on whatever controversial topic that I see the most confusion that inspires me to write something. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marty. Do you have any final message for people real quick, or is that it? Is it the end?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this, and it's been really great to chat to you.
And thank you so much for showing on board. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this crazy deep podcast. So thank you, Marty. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Peace.
Thanks. See ya.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a review if you liked it. You can check out our products at www.ketogeek.com and use our coupon code KGLAUNCH, all caps, for a $5 off of all our food products. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to join our community, we have a growing Facebook group as well. Till next time.